This year in August, there was a report published in Business Roundtable that stated top CEOs now believe shareholder value is no longer everything. Although that sounds very idealistic and optimistic, let's really look at how this can be practically achieved, considering that all businesses have been traditionally operating in the same way for the last 100 years, which is basically the model of shareholder capital. And it would be great, Rene, if you can share some light on how we can transition away from this model and towards sustainability.
Right. I agree with you. That's it's an ambitious statement and it sounds very good. But as you mentioned, considering that business has been operating in the same way for decades, centuries, it will require a completely new way of doing business, meaning new infrastructure, new philosophies, new mentalities, and new approaches. So there will be a significant shift that needs to change or needs to happen, within companies in and of themselves, if they really are going to deliver on this commitment that they said. So for me and for us, I think practically achieve, you talk about, what's practical. I think one of the lowest hanging fruits, one of the, easiest ways to connect and start to make this a reality is engaging employees. Again, your employees are your most invested in asset, your most invested in resource. They have the skills, they're committed to the work. Engage them and allow them to utilize those skills in these emerging spaces, in the communities, working with suppliers, embed them in the value chain, connect them with customers on the front line, and actually allow them to, again, back to the spirit of co-creation, co-create some of these solutions that will catapult the company forward. And again, what that does, by allowing this exposure, allowing this frontline connection, you're empowering and equipping the next wave of leadership for the company, and you're allowing them to bring back these insights back into the business that inform how that business needs to operate today and then be equipped and empowered to operate moving forward. I think one of the biggest questions that comes to my mind in thinking about, actually enabling this or enacting this promise is how is it measured? What does success look like? At the end of the day, how does the company know that they actually did deliver on their promise, outlined in this statement? Not quite sure. I know metrics and impact measurement is always, a hot topic in a sensitive area. I'm curious to see, kind of how these companies bring their measurement into fruition. But again, engaging employees is the most obvious way for us.
Wonderful. To add to that, I think this statement, we see statements coming every year, especially since the SDGs have come out. We are seeing a lot of interesting shifts happening in corporate world and just in general how business is done. It may be a reaction to what's happening around us, or it may be just more of a content creation activity. But what I think at the core of this is that things are moving for sure. Even if it's a reaction, it's a positive one. Just if you just look at not very long ago, sustainability was seen by most companies as little more than just a peripheral green issue. Like we are now looking at actually reducing the amount of energy we use. Companies are actually talking about waste disposable cost, because money is really what hits these companies. So we are seeing companies proactively talk. If there is a policy that stops you from disposing and dumping, which is something I don't want to get too much into detail, but we know that we have been seeing this in the news lately about dumping harmful waste products into our rivers. If there's a policy that stops you from doing that, there is no option but for you to innovate as a business, as a company, and look at your core practices. So the only way you can do that is not just think about maximizing the shareholder value, but increasing the value to the environment, increasing the value to the society, and increasing the value of every single product that you create within your campus. Now, having said that, I really feel that statements like this, shareholder value is no longer everything. I feel we have to start looking at a balance, saying that shareholder value is going to be generated only when there's a value for the world. the companies will only succeed. It should be almost like a requirement for a company to have some of these practices as a default practice, not just as a best practice in how they operate as a business. And we are already seeing that SDGs are driving some policy interventions at a governmental level, which are forcing a lot of companies that are not doing this by choice to make these decisions. However, that's not going to make any significant changes. So we have to have adoption. We have to see more proactivity as opposed to just reactivity from the companies, which means going back to Renee, listening to your employees, listening to your customers, listening to the powerful stories that come out of how customers are reacting to some of these products, why they're choosing one or the other, even if it means sometimes turning the product to be expensive. Also, I strongly believe that shareholder value is not going to be lost by creating a value for environment. We have to create a narrative that shows that they go hand in hand and they're not mutually exclusive, which is going back to the core that doing good and making money are not mutually exclusive things. They go hand in hand. You do good, you survive as a company. And we've seen companies, America is a prime example, where they have been companies that have existed for 150 years. But then here is also a place where we have seen companies that have been celebrated excessively for things that they've been doing and suddenly criticized for everything that they do just because we're not living in the same world when they were first created. So it's very important, if a company is in the business of solving problems, it has to look at problems at a systemic level and not at an elemental level. If you are creating an educational product, for example, if you're creating an educational product for a few section of people in a society, you want to now use design for all philosophy. Can you make this educational tool for more accessible? In fact, there's already a internet policy around making websites more accessible. So some of these most popular websites, just think about Google, they're all now accessible for people who cannot, who have reading disabilities, or people who have vision deficiencies or things like that. And now websites are supposed to, by W3 consortium, they're supposed to include tools that allow everyone to access the information on those websites. And that is just an example of how change is happening slowly, and it's happening all around us. So if the companies that are not going to keep up are definitely going to lose a lot of shareholder value as well. And this is, a very interesting statement that came out of the same report, the Business Roundtable report, which talks about major employees are investing in their workers and the communities because they know it is the only way to be successful over the long term. This was by Jamie Dimon, the chairman and CEO of JP Morgan Chase. And it talks about workers and communities in the same breath, which means that we are not just about customers and getting profits from them. We are also about employees. We are also about communities. We are also about the cities we live in. We're also about the rivers where we use the resources from. So this is a multi-stakeholder approach, solution designing, and we make sure that all these companies who are right now on the table, whose voice is very powerful right now, start making the right choices so that it becomes the new norm, even for a newer company that's about to be launched a few years from now. Having said that, this is a powerful slide that I wanted to share, as we are right now in the midst of the 74th United Nations General Assembly in New York. This just happened yesterday before this meeting. A group of 130 banks have reoriented the whole banking industry to move from a purely profit focus to a new paradigm where social and environmental impacts matter. The banks hailing from nearly 50 countries have signed this new Principles for Responsible Banking initiative between the financial institutions and the UN. If this is not an indicator that one of the most powerful sectors that drives GDPs and businesses, banking industry, is already reorienting and aligning themselves to SDGs, I don't know what else would motivate other companies to do it. We are seeing more and more companies, coalitions come together and create pacts just so that they can create a new industry standard. And this is directly to do with goal number 17, that we are not going to be able to work in isolation. This coalitions, this principles of responsible banking is a charter now can be adopted by any company who might not be at this point as part of this coalition, but can easily refer to it and start using it as a new reference point. We already saw that happening with B Labs and B certification. Not every company is a B Corp out there, but you can still get a B Lab certification. You can look at the indicators that makes you a benefit corporation, that makes you act like one, and that certainly attracts more, more impact-driven investments and more interest from passionate employees who believe in your mission. So I think these are some of the very powerful examples that we are seeing happening right now as we speak, and we want to make sure that companies do not miss out on this trend and definitely adopt this sooner than later.